This is a rather important episode in the context of the suspension of military aid from the United States of America to Ukraine. Here's how Ukraine will now receive assistance from the United States after the abrupt halt of United States aid. The teams of the presidents of Ukraine and the United States are currently working on organizing a phone conversation between Donald Trump and Volodymyr Zelensky. Meanwhile, it's known that Trump has spoken with Putin, which will be discussed separately. In this episode, we will discuss the newly announced semi-official format of United States aid to Ukraine. From now on, with the help of Europe, Ukraine will be purchasing weapons from the United States. And Trump's team is even ready to increase the volume of such sales. That means there will be no gratuitous aid, but there will be sales for which the European Union allocates the money. My name is Alexei Pechi. It's July 3rd. Now let's break everything down. But before we start, I ask you to subscribe to this channel, like this episode, and don't forget to leave any comment under this video. Also, subscribe to my Telegram channel. The link to it is in the description of this video. So, as you know, the United States has abruptly suspended all military aid to Ukraine. I talked about this in more detail in the previous episode. If you haven't watched the previous episode, watch it on the channel before continuing with this one. And, as one of the European officials stated, quote, "The United States is informing Ukraine about this decision today. A phone call between Trump and Zelensky will be arranged in Kyiv in the near future." The United States states that this is not a pause and not a suspension. The United States is still deciding how best to support Ukraine's defense. This remains a priority. At the same time, Politico adds that the Pentagon's decision to suspend some arms deliveries to Ukraine came as a surprise, even to those who are well informed on these matters. Among them are members of Congress, even those from the armed services committees and so on, State Department officials, and key European allies. And next, I'll quote Politico. "The unexpected move on Monday caused concern and disappointment, including among leading Republicans who believe that one of the top Pentagon officials had excessive influence on this decision." Here, let me remind you that this pause was initiated by the head of the Pentagon's political department, Elbridge Colby, and a small circle of advisors from Pete Hegseth's team due to concerns that the stocks of certain types of weapons in the United States are allegedly running out. They say they're giving all of this to Ukraine and some other allies. Well, even President Donald Trump's allies were disappointed by this move and blamed officials like Elbridge Colby, who led the review of United States ammunition stocks that preceded the freezing of this aid. They all pushed for this move without informing the rest of the president's administration and the United States Congress. They were supposed to do that in the first place. And so, according to allies, the decision to halt arms supplies to Ukraine was most likely made without coordination within the Trump administration. After mass layoffs at the National Security Council reduced the body to a fraction of its former size. By the way, this is a reference to that very Department of Management Efficiency, which was cutting all those agencies and slashing a huge number of employees. And now there's this kind of mess. So here's what Congressman Michael McCaul, a Republican, wrote today, quote, I think it was the Director of Policy at the Department of Defense, this Colby, who did all of this. "We basically don't have a national security advisor. I'm not even sure if they consulted Secretary of State Marco Rubio about this. There are internal disagreements in the White House. There has always been a reason for the existence of the United States National Security Council. It's a serious body under the President, under the White House, which has always been responsible for national security. They reduced this council, Mike Volks was fired, and now the acting director of this council is Mark Rubio, who actually has the State Department and foreign policy on his shoulders. He definitely doesn't have time for that." In turn, one American official said that the Pentagon's decision was uncoordinated and came as a surprise to the State Department. At the same time, the chairman of the House Appropriations Committee, Tom Cole, said that he learned about this decision from the news, but he says, "I have no complaints." Here is his quote, "At the moment, I have no reason to doubt the explanation given that we ourselves are facing a critical shortage. I know how much material we've spent, more than anyone could have imagined 6 months ago, because of what happened in the Middle East. There are limitations and real problems with our industrial base. I believe the first duty of the president is to take care of the defense of the United States. Also, Congressman Mike Rogers called this a routine pause to see what supplies we have after recent military operations in the Middle East. Next is a quote from Rogers. They're just doing an exact count. And there are 3 different categories of munitions where, in their opinion, we're a bit behind what we need for our own purposes. We're trying to get them to provide us with the final details on these 3 categories. However, the Pentagon still needs to publicly explain why it suspended arms deliveries, says Rogers. They just need to be more transparent about this issue because people are confusing it with our commitments to Ukraine. It has nothing to do with that. Well, how can it have nothing to do with it if in Poland they simply turned the weapons back from the border with Ukraine? At the same time, United States State Department spokesperson Temi Bryas made a statement about the fate of military aid to Ukraine. Next is her quote. "We have not stopped supplying weapons to Ukraine. This is a single aspect, situation, and event that has simply changed. As you heard from the Ministry of Defense, there are many other powerful options and efforts regarding the situation with Ukraine and the supply of weapons. But still, the Pentagon states that they are now preparing other tools to support Ukraine for Donald Trump. And now it is becoming more or less clear what those are. According to Politico, amid the reduction of weapons supplies from the United States, Ukraine is now changing its tactics. As Politico writes, citing its sources, Kyiv plans to ask Washington to allow Europe to purchase American weapons for Ukraine. According to the publication, several European governments are studying plans to purchase American weapons from their own defense budgets to transfer to Ukraine. Here's a quote. "The money will be counted towards the new amount of NATO defense spending, but so far there are no firm commitments. These deliveries will have to be carried out with the approval of the United States government, and this issue is still being discussed." So this is the story about the 5% of gross domestic product for defense that Trump demanded, and it's already known that the result is 0. Each country can allocate as much as 25% of its defense budget to aid Ukraine. And they want to spend this money on purchasing American weapons for Ukraine. That's the scheme. And, as noted, one of the potential stumbling blocks is the restrictions that the United States usually imposes on allies using American weapons. Let me remind you that during Joe Biden's administration, British missiles were not sent to Ukraine because they contained American components. Part of the negotiations will be devoted specifically to these permissions. So for now, of course, it's unclear whether the United States will satisfy such requests, but Zelensky is planning to discuss this issue with Trump. During the meeting between Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky and United States President Donald Trump in The Hague, it was also noted. The idea of sending more defensive weapons to Kyiv was received positively by Trump. Next is a quote. "A politician who was directly informed about the meeting described it as truly positive, noting that Trump apparently was compassionate and understanding. Another person informed about the exchange of views between the 2 leaders said that it was productive and went very, very well." At the same time, the chairman of the Senate Armed Services Committee, Rodza Viker, said that Zelensky changed his request from military aid to the purchase of weapons. That is, "We are no longer asking for help, we are asking to be sold to." Quote, "So," Viker says, "I was told that." President Zelensky's request now is not so much for financial aid from the United States, but rather for the opportunity to use European money to buy weapons and ammunition from us. It's important to note here that until this week, aid was coming to Ukraine through Poland, and according to one of the Trump administration officials, it was supposed to continue for several more months. Depending on the size of each package, the planned packages were similar in composition to those previously sent, including artillery shells, small arms, and air defense missiles. But this unexpected cancellation of arms deliveries by the Pentagon has created some uncertainty. Considering the fact that some types of weapons that are critically important for Ukraine are not produced by anyone in the democratic world except the United States, Ukraine, together with its European partners, is ready to buy them for real money, and this is exactly the scheme that is currently being discussed with the Americans. But, it's still worth reminding that when Washington suspended aid to Ukraine for just 1 week last time, it had consequences. In the operations of the armed forces of Ukraine in the Kursk direction. We all understand what this is about, so I'll leave it at that. Share your opinions and conclusions in the comments below this episode. Subscribe to the channel, hit the bell, and don't forget to like.